Hi everybody, my name's Sarah and I work at Te Araha Family Budgeting Services, and it's my absolute pleasure to have been asked to present a series of videos for Kai from the Kite Kitchen. Now week 1 we're going to look at making your food budget last. Now there are lots of things in life and lots of costs that we have no control over, but we can control lots of things with food, and so these series of videos aim to really help you with that. So I'm really have lots of pleasure in welcoming a guest presenter this week, and that's my mum, Mary. Hi, Mum.
Hi.
Now, Mum's my inspiration for all things food. She's had to make her food budget last a lot over the years, and so I thought who better to bring in than to help me present these ideas. So, Mum, what would your top tip be for food shopping?
Make a list and sticking to it.
Oh, yeah. That's a good idea, because I think also we're going to come up to the weekly meal planner a bit later on in the series, but I think making a meal plan and then writing your list of ingredients, what you need for that week down, is a really good idea, because then you don't get distracted, you know exactly what you've got to buy, and it helps you stick to your budget. Now you can buy fruit and veg every 2 or 3 days if you want to keep them fresh, but there are lots of fresh fruit and veg that last longer, and we'll also talk about how to keep them fresh a little bit later on as well. Now, what's the other tip that you would give, Mum, when you're buying?
Looking for buying in bulk, so that you can store what you're not using straight away. Yeah, that would be good.
And buying in bulk, sometimes you might be too much for you to have on your own, or have it, you might not use it fast enough.
Well,
so what we were thinking when we were talking about it earlier on was maybe you could go shopping with a friend.
Yes.
So you could buy a big bag of potatoes and then you could go halves. Big bag of rice and then you could go halves. You could even do that with cooking oil, as long as you've got your container to put it into. So that's another way to really buy a cost-effective way. And when we say buying bulk, the reason we say that is because it pays to check the cost per mils or per grams with food. So you might see an item that's slightly smaller than another item and it looks cheaper, but when you check the tag and the price tag, you'll see that it's not actually as cheap to buy the smaller one. It's better to buy in bulk and more. So I guess the other good way to shopping is not everyone has to go to the shop these days.
No.
You can actually go online. And one of the things about shopping online is that you can stick to your list.
Yes, you make a list of the things that you need and you only get those things delivered to you.
Yeah.
Or pick up.
Because when you go into the shop, obviously you've got a list, but then you might be tempted to buy other things. So shopping online is probably one of those ways where you don't do that. If you do shop in person, a lot of people do. I still prefer to shop in person. If you do shop in person, don't go hungry. What happens when you go shopping hungry?
You buy more food. See, I fancy that.
Yeah. Things smell really good and you go, yep, I think I want that, but it's not because you really want it, it's because you're hungry. So don't be hungry. Have a feed before you go. The other thing I want to talk about is specials. Yeah. So specials are great. You see things that are 2 for 1 or 3 for 2 or whatever. Specials are only specials if they're on your list. If you didn't mean to buy them, then they're probably not a special. However, I think there is an exception, and that is if they're pantry items, they're something that you buy all the time, and they are really reduced, I would say that's a good idea.
That is a good idea. They can sit on your shelf until you need them.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to talk about seasons too, because we're talking about shopping smarter. There are certain vegetables and fruit that are in season and they're always going to be cheaper than the ones that are out of season.
That's true.
So, look at your local shopping, your farmers markets, you look down the road, people quite often have stalls. But when you're in the supermarket or any fruit and veg, look for the seasonal fruit and veg because they'll always be cheaper. Now, how do you feel about fresh versus frozen?
Well, fresh is good, but frozen is there for convenience. And it can be in the freezer until you want to use it. Oh, I'll go and buy some broccoli, but you've got it in the freezer, so you're saving there. It's always nice to have a mixture in the freezer you can call on if needed, or tins as well.
Because tins is another thing. Tins and frozen goods. I mean, yes, it's convenient, but also they stay fresher for longer because they are frozen. They snap freeze them, so they are nice. They're just like they're fresh by the time you've boiled them. So don't be scared of using frozen vegetables and tinned vegetables. They can quite often be a lot cheaper too.
And also on bulk buying, if you've got 3 broccoli for the price of 2. freeze to yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And would you just freeze them fresh, or would you blanch them first?
I would blanch them.
And
first to keep the
blanching
colour.
means that you just boil them very, very briefly in hot water, and that helps retain the green colour, the freshness.
And then plunge them into ice water.
Yeah.
To stop them cooking and keep the colour.
Yeah.
And then drain and freeze.
We'll talk a bit more about the storing a bit later on, but it's a really good idea that if you do get those specials and it's something that you eat all the time, that you make the most of that, and then you can put it in the freezer. The other great tip I love is that, when people, obviously I work at the budgeting service, and one of the things that people find when they go shopping is that they often don't buy enough of certain things to last them the week. So they will have to pop out maybe 2-3 times through the week and buy bread and milk. Well, you don't have to do that. You can actually buy enough bread and milk for the week or 2 weeks or however long as you go shopping. As long as you've got room in your freezer, you can actually freeze bread. You can freeze milk. Yeah. It's absolutely fine. Just remember to take a little bit out of the bottle of milk because obviously it expands. Yeah. Now, we've sort of touched on the shopping. Now what about when we get the groceries home? I think this might be a good time to talk about the storing and the saving of the food.
Yeah.
So what would you say, we've covered milk and bread. What else can you freeze when you bring it home if you've bought in bulk?
Cheese.
It's a good one.
You can buy a block of cheese, say a kilo, cut it in half, use a half and freeze the other. Another tip is grate that cheese and freeze it grated, ready for sauces and sprinkling on cooked items.
Yeah. Again, we're going to get into that freezing and what more you can do with the freezer later on. But that's a really good tip because cheese is actually cheaper to buy in a kg block than a 500 normally, or smaller. The other thing with bread, and a lot of people don't know this, but with bread, obviously we all know you can toast bread from frozen, but you can actually make sandwiches with frozen bread. And by the time you get to lunchtime, it's defrosted and the bread feels like it's fresh. So a lot of people think, I've got to defrost the bread first. Well, you don't have to. You can actually make sandwiches with frozen bread, believe it or not. And I think also making food last longer is really important because we do waste a lot of food. So one tip that I heard which was excellent was apples. If you actually buy apples, rather than leaving them out, if you store them in the fridge, they actually last for longer. So you don't get as much waste. And you had a good one about celery.
Yes, if you use have a whole hand of celery, you cut off the bottom and you put it in water on the kitchen windowsill. It will actually sprout and you can have celery greens, or if it stays longer, more.
Yeah, and also you can do that and just put it in the fridge in a jug of water and actually stay crunchy and crispy for a week or longer, rather than it going wilting in your drawer and going to waste.
Yeah.
You can do the same with broccoli. Actually, you can cut the bottom off the broccoli because very often it will be quite hard, and then place that in water as well, and that will actually extend its life by at least a week. Now that brings me along to an interesting broccoli fact that I found out yesterday, which is, I know it happens, but the actual figures blew my mind. Now, even that humble broccoli could be costing you money. So if you paid, say, $2.29 for a head of broccoli, and it just you threw away the stalk, you just cook the florets, you throw away the stalk, well, you're actually wasting about $60 a year. So you can actually use the stalk. A lot of people don't know you can, but you can. You can use them for all sorts of things: vegetable stock, soups, pesto, pasta sauce, salad, and lots more. And again, that'll be something that we'll talk about in a later segment. Mum touched on this earlier on, which was about cheese. You don't have to buy grated cheese. You can make it yourself.
Yes.
But the one point that you did miss out, which I think is quite important, Mum, is how do you make sure that cheese doesn't all clump together once you put it in the bag?
Once you've grated it, sprinkle it with corn flour and just give it a toss. Put it in the bag, and that will keep the pieces of cheese from clumping. Also, if you can use it for toasted cheese, not a problem. If you're making a sauce with that cheese, that flour will start to thicken your sauce. So it's a win-win.
Perfect. What a great solution. Now, the other thing we can do is carrots. Sometimes carrots just take a little bit long to use up. If you buy a lot, they're a pretty good price at the moment because they're seasonal. So if you notice that they are going a little bit soft, I would suggest that you actually grate them and you chuck them in the freezer really quickly, and you can actually use those carrots to thicken up a stew or a casserole, all stuff that we're eating at this time of year. And then one other little tip about storing and saving, and you told me this one, Mum, and like I say, we'll get into more of the looking after stuff later on, but this one in particular was a good one. Quite often you'll have a recipe that calls for a whole jar of tomato paste. It ends up going back in the fridge. It can go mouldy, although you can put olive oil on top of it to stop that. But what else could you do with it?
You get your ice cube tray and you fill the ice cube trays, tidy off the top, freeze them, and then you pop out 1 or 2 pieces, however big they are, to use in the recipe. Let them thaw if it's for a pizza base, or straight into a stew or casserole. That goes for gravy, any liquid, citrus fruit, orange juice, that type of thing. It can all be frozen.
Like I say, we're going to get into that a bit later on in other videos, but they're all fantastic ideas to make your food go further. So that's your shopping, your storing when you get home, and saving your food. Like I say, later on we're going to get into a few more tips and tricks around those things, but it's a really good idea. I think the main points is make a list, have a meal plan, stick to the list. Don't buy specials unless they're specials, unless you really want them. And make sure you buy seasonal. That's another really good thing. And try and use as much of the food as you can. If you don't use it the way that you would use it normally, find out, are there other ways I can use these things? And then freeze stuff. Freeze as much stuff as you can, and then it's there for later. That's all for this segment, guys. Next week, we're going to be looking at other lovely tips and savings for you. So make sure you tune in. Mum won't be here. She's got to go back. But thank you, Mum, for your time. You're amazing. And we'll see you then. Thanks, guys. Ka kite.